The United States of America, a nation forged on the ideals of opportunity, where the belief that hard work and determination could transform even the most humblest beginnings into a prosperous future, has been the cornerstone of its identity. For generations, America stood as the envy of the world, a shining city upon a hill, embodying economic might and unwavering stability, a beacon that inspired countless dreams and aspirations. But those days are fast becoming a distant memory. The U.S. economic collapse is on the horizon, but how is this even possible? At the heart of this looming crisis is the staggering level of debt that has engulfed the American consumer. According to the latest quarterly report on household debt and credit, the total household debt rose by $184 billion to $17.69 trillion. Mortgage balances increased by $190 billion to $12.44 trillion, while balances on auto loans climbed $9 billion to $1.62 trillion, continuing their upward trend. A 2023 report from Northwestern Mutual found that Americans are taking three major steps to address economic uncertainty. Nearly 64% of respondents are cutting costs, 50% are building savings, and 41% are delaying large expenses. Each household often utilizes multiple strategies at a time. Compounding these challenges is the rising inflation rate in the country. The Consumer Price Index, or CPI, rose 3.9% on an annual average basis in 2023, following a 40-year high increase of 6.8% in 2022 and a 3.4% increase in 2021. Aside from 2022, the annual average growth in 2023 is the largest since 1991. As the confluence of these two factors continues to weigh on the U.S. economy, the specter of a full-blown recession looms even larger. The implications of such a downturn could be catastrophic, with the potential to wipe out trillions in household wealth, trigger mass layoffs, and plunge the country into a prolonged period of economic malaise not seen in decades. In this video, we will uncover the hidden forces and critical missteps that are driving the U.S. economy to the brink and explore what it means for the future of American prosperity. America, the world's largest economy, the global hegemon of the post-World War II era, is teetering on the brink of collapse. The warning signs are everywhere, from the shuttered businesses and foreclosed homes to the lines at the food banks and the tent cities in the streets. The nation that once symbolized the triumph of capitalism now seems poised to become its greatest casualty. It's a stunning reversal of fortune for a country that for so long seemed to have it all figured out. The 20th century was, in many ways, the American century. The United States emerged from the ashes of the Great Depression and the Second World War as the world's preeminent economic superpower. The post-war boom of the 1950s and 60s saw an explosion of prosperity and upward mobility as millions of Americans joined the middle class, bought homes, and sent their children to college. Even in the face of challenges and upheavals, the Cold War, the oil shocks of the 1970s, the dot-com bust of the early 2000s, the American economy always seemed to bounce back stronger. The country's GDP, a measure of the total value of goods and services produced, grew from around $300 billion in 1950 to over $27.36 trillion by 2023, adjusted for inflation. The American consumer, buoyed by rising wages and a seemingly endless appetite for goods and services, became the engine that drove not just the U.S. economy, but the world's. But somewhere along the way, something changed. The engine began to sputter and stall. The once mighty American consumer began to buckle under the weight of stagnant wages, rising costs, and mounting debt. The warning signs were there for those who cared to look. The widening gap between rich and poor, the decline of manufacturing, the rise of speculative bubbles in housing and finance. But they were easy to ignore in the heady days of the 1990s and early 2000s when the stock market soared and credit flowed like water. Then came the financial crisis of 2008, and the illusion of eternal growth and prosperity came crashing down. Banks failed, millions lost their homes and jobs, and the global economy teetered on the brink of collapse. The U.S. government and Federal Reserve stepped in with bailouts and stimulus packages, pumping trillions of dollars into the financial system to keep it afloat. But the damage was done. The crisis exposed the deep structural weaknesses in the American economy and the rot at the core of the American dream. And in the years since, those weaknesses have only grown more pronounced. Take inflation, for example. After years of relative stability, consumer prices in the U.S. are now rising at the fastest pace in over 4 decades. According to data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Consumer Price Index rose 8.5% in March 2022, compared to a year earlier, the sharpest increase since 1981. The cost of essentials like food, fuel, and housing are skyrocketing, squeezing household budgets and eroding the purchasing power of the dollar. The reasons for this inflationary surge are complex and multifaceted, but a few key factors stand out. One is the massive amount of fiscal and monetary stimulus pumped into the economy in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Between March 2020 and March 2021, more than 476 million payments totaling $814 billion in financial relief went to households impacted by the pandemic, including direct payments to individuals, expanded unemployment benefits, and aid to businesses and state and local governments. At the same time, the Federal Reserve slashed interest rates to near zero and launched a massive bond buying program, effectively printing money to inject liquidity into the financial system. While these measures helped stave off an even deeper economic collapse, they also sowed the seeds for future inflation. With so much money sloshing around the system and interest rates at rock-bottom levels, the stage was set for a surge in demand and a corresponding rise in prices. Another factor contributing to inflation is the ongoing disruption of global supply chains. The pandemic exposed the fragility of the intricate web of trade and transportation that undergirds the modern economy. As lockdowns and factory closures led to shortages of everything from computer chips to toilet paper. Even as demand has rebounded, supply has struggled to keep up, leading to bottlenecks, delays, and rising prices. These supply chain issues have been compounded by a range of other factors, from extreme weather events to geopolitical tensions. The blockage of the Suez Canal by a giant container ship in March 2021, for example, held up an estimated $9.6 billion of trade per day, while the ongoing trade war between the U.S. and China has disrupted the flow of goods and raised costs for businesses and consumers alike. But inflation and supply chain disruptions are just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the trouble facing the American economy. Perhaps even more concerning is the massive amount of debt that has been accumulated at every level of society. According to data from the Federal Reserve, total household debt in the U.S. reached a record $14.6 trillion in the first quarter of 2021, up nearly $1.7 trillion from a year earlier. That includes $10.4 trillion in mortgage debt, $1.4 trillion in auto loans, and $1.6 trillion in student loans. The median household income, as estimated by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, was $90,000 in 2022. That's for a household. The median individual income for Americans in 2022 was $56,368. Median means that half had a higher income and half had a lower income. The average American household debt load, including mortgage, is $101,915. But it's not just households that are drowning in debt. Corporate debt in the U.S. has also exploded in recent years, soaring to 80% in 2023. S&P said there could be hard times ahead for corporate America, which according to the Federal Reserve is carrying a $13.7 trillion debt load. Company debt has jumped 18.3% since 2020 as companies took advantage of the Fed slashing interest rates in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. Much of this debt has been used to finance stock buybacks and dividend payments rather than productive investments, leaving many companies vulnerable to economic shocks and downturns. And then there's the government debt. The federal debt held by the public reached $34.5 trillion in 2024, up from just over $5 trillion in 2000. That's equivalent to over 100% of the country's annual GDP, a level not seen since the end of World War II. While the U.S. government currently benefits from low interest rates, making it relatively cheap to service this debt, there are concerns about the long-term sustainability of such high borrowing levels, particularly as the population ages and entitlement costs continue to rise. This mountain of debt has contributed to a number of other economic problems, from the skyrocketing cost of housing to the decline in living standards for many Americans. In many parts of the country, home prices have risen far faster than incomes, putting home ownership out of reach for millions of families. According to the National Association of Realtors, the median existing home sales price rose 4.8% from March 2023 to $393,500, the ninth consecutive month of year-over-year price gains and the highest price ever for March. At the same time, the cost of renting has also soared, particularly in major cities. A 2021 report by the National Low-Income Housing Coalition found that a full-time worker earning the federal minimum wage could not afford a two-bedroom rental anywhere in the U.S. and could afford a one-bedroom rental in only 7% of counties. This housing affordability crisis has contributed to a rise in homelessness in many parts of the country. According to a recent report, 653,104 people experienced homelessness in the U.S. in 2023. 2023. That number represents a record high tally and a 12% increase over 2022. In some cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco, the problem has reached crisis levels, with entire 10 cities springing up on sidewalks and underpasses. The rise in homelessness is just one symptom of a broader decline in the standard of living for many Americans. Despite the country's immense wealth, poverty remains stubbornly high, with over 37 million people living below the official poverty line in 2020, according to data from the U.S. Census Bureau. That's a poverty rate of 11.4%, up from 10.5% in 2019. Even those above the poverty line are often struggling to make ends meet. A 2019 report by the Federal Reserve found that nearly 40% of American adults would struggle to cover an unexpected $400 expense, while a 2020 survey by the Pew Research Center found that a majority of Americans believe the economy is rigged in favor of the wealthy and powerful. This sense of economic insecurity and inequality has been exacerbated by a range of other factors, from the decline of unions and collective bargaining to the rise of automation and outsourcing. The result is a growing divide between the haves and have-nots, with a shrinking middle class and a concentration of wealth and power at the very top. And then there's the issue of illegal immigration. While the economic impact of immigration is complex and often overstated, there's no denying that the influx of undocumented workers has put downward pressure on wages in certain industries and strained public services in some communities. According to reports, Border Patrol apprehensions of migrants at the U.S.-Mexico border are on the rise again. Although the majority of people attempting to enter the United States illegally are stopped, this trend could foreshadow an increase in the U.S. unauthorized immigrant population after years of relative stability. As the storm clouds gather and the ground trembles beneath the feet of Americans, the stark reality becomes inescapable. The great American economic engine is grinding to a halt, poised to collapse under the weight of its own unsustainable excesses. The numbers tell a chilling tale: the mountain of debt, the vanishing savings, the relentless march of inflation. This is no mere economic downturn, no temporary blip on the radar. No, this is the harbinger of a cataclysmic reckoning, a perfect storm of greed and mismanagement, and if care is not taken, a looming disaster that could reshape the very fabric of American society is definitely not far-fetched. If you liked this video, hit the like button and help us spread the word. And don't forget to subscribe to get notifications on our latest news and analysis. In the meantime, check out one of these videos here to learn more. Thanks for watching.